In the 21st year of the Salsario calendar, the kingdom of Granvold is locked in an intense battle against monstrous forces. This place has become the last bastion of humanity, where only a handful of survivors have gathered. The soldiers, who once defied reality itself and rallied with nothing but faint hope, are now being overwhelmed by swarms of monsters attacking from all sides. An unavoidable fate is rapidly closing in before their eyes, pushing humanity closer to extinction. Although many soldiers have fallen, those who remain capable are carrying the injured to the castle, where they are being treated with healing magic. Without taking a single break, Will continues healing one soldier after another, instructing the troops to bring the wounded to him immediately before it is too late. One of the healers, clearly worried about Master Will, urges him to flee, warning that the gate is about to be breached. He insists that it is too dangerous for a healer of Will's caliber to remain on the front lines. Hearing this, Will looks at him in anger and asks if he is suggesting that he abandon everyone. Gritting his teeth, Will declares that he will not allow humanity to perish. He firmly believes that if he continues healing the soldiers, victory is still possible. He recalls the final words of his comrades, calling him humanity's hope and the world's greatest hero. Suddenly, another soldier rushes into the castle while carrying the injured general, desperately searching for Master Will. Seeing this, Will immediately moves to help and instructs the soldier to gently place the general on the ground. Overcome with worry, the soldier asks if the general can be saved, explaining that without him, the entire battle line will collapse. Will responds with confidence, stating that saving the general is the very reason he came to the front lines. Will begins casting healing magic on the general, and soon, the arm that had been severely injured earlier starts to heal. Once the arm is completely healed, the general opens his eyes, looking anxious and deeply frustrated as he regains consciousness. One of the soldiers praises Master Will upon seeing the general awaken. While the general is still confused, Will smiles and reassures him, saying that no matter how severe the injury, he will heal everyone. He confidently adds that if things continue this way, humanity's victory is just around the corner. However, the general stares at his restored hands before suddenly striking Will in the face. With his fist clenched and his body trembling, he declares that Will has done something unnecessary. Both the soldiers and Will himself are left in shock. Will cannot understand why the general would attack him. Gathering his courage, a frightened soldier asks the general why he acted that way. Instead of answering, the general angrily shouts at them to be silent. The general then begins drawing his sword, startling Will and everyone nearby. Continuing in his rage, he moves to attack Will, demanding to know if this restored arm is the reason he refuses to fall. The general yells at Will, asking if he truly does not understand, saying that while Will continues healing the wounded from the rear, the soldiers' suffering and despair on the battlefield, as they face those monsters, remains unchanged. Just when the general believes it is finally over, Will heals him once again. The general then shouts. Not only the general, but everyone present feels the same way. They no longer want to fight. Hearing this, Will looks at their faces and sees nothing but gloom. Despite this, Will thinks differently. He believes that he has been trying to save as many people as possible. However, he begins to wonder if that means everything he has done so far is pointless, and even his decision to come all the way to the front lines now feel meaningless. The general tells Will that he does not care if Will is known as the world's greatest healer. He says he is tired of suffering because of Will. After saying this, the general sheaths his sword, declaring that humanity is going to fall anyway, and if Will wishes to continue fighting, then he should do it alone. Will shouts back in distress, explaining that healers cannot use offensive magic at all, and without the soldiers, this place will surely collapse. At that very moment, a dragon attacks the castle with blazing flames. The wall shatters, and the general is defeated as well. When the dust finally settles, Will glares at the terrifying dragon and at last realizes what kind of monster the people he healed had been fighting. It is true that Will had only been watching from the rear. As this realization sinks in, Will clenches his robe and curses himself, saying that all the time he spent learning healing magic was wasted. Even with his immense talent for healing magic, and even after being honored as the world's greatest healer, he believes that he should have fought with his own hands. Will then grabs a nearby stone and attempts to face the dragon, thinking that if only he could return to that day, he would surely learn offensive magic this time. The dragon sees Will charging and easily takes down Will. He then opens his eyes and wakes up in his bed. Looking around, Will notices an admission guide lying on the table. As he approaches it, he realizes that if this guide is here, then he has returned to that day from 5 years ago. Now, it is the 16th year of the Solisario calendar, the day when Will, who would later become the world's greatest healer, was defeated by a dragon. He was destined to become a healer after enrolling in a specialized academy for healing magic. Even so, this moment takes place 1 week before entering Highlight Academia. Will stares intensely at the letter, uncertain of what truly happened. But if his final wish has been granted, then he knows exactly what he must do. Clenching the paper tightly, Will makes a firm decision to enroll in the academy that specializes in offensive magic, Schwartz Academia. Healers cannot use offensive magic. That is common knowledge among all mages. Because of this, Will must break through that barrier, and there will be many walls he must overcome to do so. However, he possesses memories from his past life and the healing magic he mastered during that time. If he makes full use of these advantages, he believes he can change the future by fighting himself and saving the world. To achieve this, Will must first enroll in Schwartz Academia, the world's most prestigious academy for learning offensive magic. Schwartz's superior education is said to develop anyone into a first-rate offensive mage. Even the individual Will encountered in his past life was a graduate of Schwartz. However, the academy's methods are closely guarded secrets that can only be learned by enrolling there. Thinking about this frustrates Will, as there has likely never been a case of a healer enrolling before, which leaves him wondering what he should do. He considers whether money might help, since nobles sometimes use their wealth to force their untalented children into Schwartz, relying on the academy's ability to turn anyone into a capable offensive mage. Unfortunately, Will has no money, and he regrets that he could not bring wealth from his past life. Even though money would have been meaningless in the face of humanity's extinction, he should have earned enough rewards during his time as the kingdom's chief healer to last a lifetime. Even if he works as a healer now, he will not earn enough in time for the admission process. While struggling to think of a way to enroll in the academy, Will is suddenly interrupted when his sister enters his room and asks if he is awake. Seeing her opens the floodgates of emotion for Will, and he nearly breaks down in tears as he realizes that he has truly returned to the past, to a time when she is still alive. Noticing the tears in his eyes, she asks if something is wrong or if his stomach hurts. Will quickly denies it, saying that something simply got into his eyes. He then greets his sister, and she happily greets him back with a pure smile. Will continues to stare at his sister, confusing her, as he thinks to himself that in this life, he must prevent the tragedy that will one day befall her using his healing magic. This time, he can save the people he failed to save before. That thought sparks an idea in his mind, and Will suddenly smiles, thanking his sister for unknowingly giving him inspiration. Now confident, Will believes he has found a way to make it work. His sister becomes even more confused and asks what is going on. Without explaining, Will tells her that he is heading out and promises to explain everything when he returns. She responds by telling him to make sure he is home before dinner. The Magic Academy Alliance is an organization that oversees all magic academies in the kingdom and makes decisions regarding magical education. At this time, the chairman of the alliance is also serving as the headmaster of Schwartz Academia. However, at a certain point, the chairman stopped appearing at the alliance altogether, and the reason for this was his granddaughter. Inside the chairman's mansion, he is seen visiting his granddaughter. Chairman Alnaram Goldgrand is deeply worried about Marie. He apologizes to her, explaining that today's healer was once again not skilled enough, but he promises that he will find someone capable of curing her illness. He begs her to hold on just a little longer. At this time, Chairman Alnaram is constantly attending to his granddaughter's condition. However, the healing magic of that era is unable to cure her illness, and she eventually passes away. That is what happened in the previous timeline, but this time, Will intends to change it. Will enters Marie's room through the window and asks Chairman Alnaram to allow him to handle the task. Chairman Alnaram quickly recognizes Will as the scholarship student from Highlands Academia. Will steps fully into the room, shocked that the chairman knows who he is. Chairman Alnaram continues, explaining that Will's talent for healing magic is already famous throughout the alliance, although he never expected Will to be the type to enter through a window. Will smiles upon hearing this, thinking that his former self would never have done something like this. Perhaps because he has experienced death once, he feels bolder than before. Even so, Will tells Alnaram that there is no time to spare, neither for her nor for himself. As he removes his coat, Will confidently claims that he can cure her. Chairman Alnaram fixes his gaze on Will and asks what his true intentions are. Will replies that his reasons can wait, but first, Chairman Alnaram must give him permission to treat her, as the disease has progressed further than he initially thought. After saying this, Will looks straight into Chairman Alnaram's eyes. After a moment of silence, Chairman Alnaram finally agrees to give Will a chance and tells him to show what he can do. Will exhales deeply and sits beside Marie, noticing the intense stare from Chairman Alnaram. It feels as though the chairman is ready to strike at the slightest mistake. Will thinks that this level of pressure is only fitting for the headmaster of an offensive magic academy. Calming himself, Will takes Marie's hand and begins healing her. Will notices that his magical power has diminished since returning to the past, but he still remembers the healing formulas. The treatment formula for Marie's illness, known as Zora disease, was originally developed 2 years later, yet with his current abilities, Will is able to treat her. Marie slowly opens her eyes and notices Will beside her. Will feels relieved seeing that she is all right and gently tells her that she will be fine. To Marie, Will appears like a charming prince who has come to save her, calmly instructing her to take it easy because her stamina is still low. She smiles happily at Will's words and then shyly turns to the other side, softly agreeing. Shortly after, Chairman Alnaram asks Marie if she truly feels okay. With a bright expression, Marie reassures her grandfather that she is fine and wonders aloud how many years it has been since she last felt this good. Overcome with emotion, Alnaram begins to cry tears of joy while Will watches the scene with a warm smile. The chairman is deeply grateful to see his granddaughter healthy once again. Later, Will and Chairman Alnaram move to the guest room. where Alnaram expresses his heartfelt thanks and asks if there is anything he can do in return. Will thanks him in response and explains that his request is not a difficult one. He states that, as they have just seen, his healing magic has already reached the highest level, leaving nothing more for him to learn in that field. For that reason, Will asks Chairman Alnaram to help him enroll in Schwartz Academia. Chairman Alnaram is visibly shocked to learn that Will wishes to attend an offensive magic academy instead of continuing to develop his healing talent. He asks Will if he truly understands what such a decision means. With a firm and resolute expression, Will confirms that he does. Seeing the determination in Will's eyes, Chairman Alnaram stands up and declares that perhaps his authority existed for this very moment. He then assures Will that he will personally see to it that Will is enrolled in Schwartz Academia. The two shake hands, sealing the agreement. The scene then shifts to a professor who angrily complains about Chairman Alnaram, saying that just when he thought the chairman had finally returned, he went and did something outrageous. The professor questions whether a healer could even keep up with Schwartz's curriculum. Looking over Will's profile, the professor scoffs, claiming that a pampered healer like him could never learn offensive magic. On the day of the entrance ceremony, all the students gather in the assembly hall as Chairman Alnaram addresses them. Schwartz Academia is a boarding school that specializes in offensive magic, featuring a unique curriculum, vast grounds, and numerous training facilities. These include research centers, an enormous library, influential alumni beyond the academy, and the ability to receive various forms of support from the kingdom. There is no better environment for learning offensive magic. Since there has never been a case of a healer enrolling, Will knows that countless difficulties await him. However, he believes that if he studies here, he can also become an offensive mage. Will considers this place to be where he will change his fate. After enrollment, reality quickly proves otherwise during class. The professor orders Will to fire at the target. Will does his best to form the image of a fireball and launch it at the target, but no matter how hard he tries, he is unable to do so. The professor, seeing this, states that Will has failed once again today. This leaves Will extremely frustrated as the professor declares that Will not be allowed to attend class until he can break through the target using basic offensive magic. He then instructs Will to practice on his own at the training ground behind the building. Although hesitant, Will asks the professor to teach him properly, explaining that he cannot even practice under these conditions. Adjusting his glasses, the professor coldly replies that teaching a healer would be nothing more than a waste of time. Hearing this, Will asks in frustration if he can at least study theory in the library. The professor responds dismissively, saying that there are no books there for a healer to read. He then warns Will that if he steps out of line, he will face severe punishment. In the middle of this argument, a student suddenly throws a fireball toward Will while smirking and saying that Will is in the way. The fireball strikes Will in the back, knocking him to the ground. As Will struggles to his feet, he turns around, trying to understand what just happened. The student mocks him, asking if he cannot even dodge that, and taunts him by saying that this is an offensive magic academy, where there is no place for a weakling who cannot even protect himself. In other words, the student claims that it is Will's own fault for being hit. The professor places a hand on Opus's shoulder, agreeing with him, and suggests that Will should enroll in a healing magic academy instead of remaining here. Opus continues smirking and taunting Will, saying that at least there, gentle healers could comfort him. As night falls, Will sits alone on a bench in the training ground and lets out a deep sigh. There is no sign at all that suggests he can learn offensive magic. Closing his eyes, Will reflects that he knew this path would be a struggle. The reason is that healing magic and offensive magic draw from different sources of power. Mages convert mana, the power of the caster's spirit, through formulas to activate magic, and the nature of that mana is determined by the caster's state of mind. Offensive magic uses active mana to create flames. A healer who possesses only passive mana cannot use offensive magic. However, Schwartz Academia possesses the knowledge to train first-rate offensive mages from nearly zero. Among those methods, there must be a way to refine active mana. Will is confident in his mana control, and he believes that if he can learn this technique, he should be able to convert passive mana into active mana. He never expected, however, that he would not even be allowed to attend class. Both students and teachers look down on healers to this extent, which makes Will think that such behavior is typical of those born with active mana. Even so, Will refuses to give up. He stands up, recalling that there was someone who also had very little mana at first and managed to refine it at Schwartz. Because of that, Will is certain that enrolling in Schwartz Academia was not the wrong choice. Still, he knows that continuing blindly will not help, and he has not even been granted access to the library. He considers the possibility of sneaking in. Just as he is thinking this, someone calls out to him, asking what he is doing at such a late hour. Will turns around and immediately apologizes, but he is shocked when the person steps into the light. It is none other than Veronica. In his past life, Will fought alongside Veronica on the battlefield. She was a first-class offensive mage who eventually lost her life in his presence. Seeing her again in this life fills Will with nostalgia. While he is lost in thought, Veronica draws her sword and points it at Will, leaving him stunned and confused about why she would do so. She explains that there is a suspicious student wandering around, so it is only natural for her to be cautious. She asks whether Will is causing trouble in the middle of the night or training seriously for his future. Hearing her words, Will Will realizes that she is nothing like the bullies he encountered earlier, and he knows he must not provoke her. He quickly assures her that he is simply training. Hearing this, Veronica sheaths her sword, allowing Will to let out a sigh of relief. Will then asks if she is Veronica. She confirms it but questions why he is addressing his teacher so casually. Will is shocked by this revelation, as in his past life, she was not much older than him. Seeing his reaction, Veronica explains that she skipped several grades and became a teacher as soon as this academic year began. Knowing her exceptional talent, Will understands how this is possible, and more importantly, he realizes that this may be his opportunity to finally receive proper instruction in offensive magic. Standing there, Will tells Professor Veronica that he wants to attend her classes and asks what he needs to do in order to do so. She apologizes and explains that she has not been assigned to teach any classes yet. Because she frequently skipped grades herself, she never truly attended regular classes. She further reveals that this year she is working as an assistant instructor, mainly handling student questions. The administration believed that students would find it easier to consult someone closer to their own age. However, she admits that, for some reason, no one ever comes to her with questions. She says this with an innocent expression, which makes Will smile awkwardly. He thinks to himself that everyone is probably intimidated by someone who draws her sword so quickly. Still, this only makes the situation a greater opportunity for Will, as it means he can freely ask Professor Veronica for guidance. Smiling, Will asks if it is alright for him to ask questions. She agrees, saying that it is part of her job. Will decides to be direct and asks what Professor Veronica believes a healer must do in order to master offensive magic. Hearing this, she reveals that she had already sensed something unusual about his mana flow and now realizes that Will is the new student everyone has been talking about. Will asks if she already knew about him, and she responds that a healer attempting to learn offensive magic is extremely rare, and she has never heard of such a case before. Will explains that he has heard Schwartz possesses a method capable of refining active mana from almost nothing. If such a method exists, he believes he should be able to handle active mana as well. She confirms that such a method does exist, and adds that she can teach it herself. This makes Will extremely happy, and he is about to ask her to train him when she continues, saying that even so, it would still be impossible for Will to use offensive magic. Confused, Will asks her to explain. She tells him that he already possesses an overwhelming amount of passive mana. At that level, even if he were to refine active mana, it would simply dissolve back into his passive mana. Even if he managed to refine active mana using a different method and mix it with passive mana, offensive magic formulas would still fail to function properly. Hearing this leaves Will deeply troubled, and he asks if there is truly no way for a healer to use offensive magic at all. She replies that there is none that she knows of. This realization shakes Will, as his plan seems to have failed so easily, yet he refuses to give up. He thinks that if no method exists, then he will create one himself. After coming to this conclusion, Will bows and thanks Professor Veronica, telling her that he will think things through on his own. As he turns to leave, she stops him, saying that their conversation is not finished yet. She continues by explaining that while it is true that healers cannot use offensive magic in the conventional sense, there is still a way for a healer to become an offensive mage. Will is confused by this statement and apologizes before asking her to elaborate. She holds up her sword and explains that it is a weapon made of iron, and when swung, it can defeat enemies. She then points to a bench nearby, explaining that it is a chair made of wood, designed for people to sit on and rest. However, she adds that if someone swings it and strikes with it, even that chair can knock someone down. After finishing her explanation, she sets the chair down and explains that Will simply never thought of using it that way because it was created for a different purpose, but he is free to use it however he wants. She then uses her hands as another example, gently patting Will and explaining that the same hands can comfort someone or cause harm, depending on how they are used. She apologizes, asking if she hit him too hard, and Will stammers before confirming that he is fine. She explains that the core issue is how something is used, and that anything can become a weapon depending on the intent behind it. This realization opens a flood of ideas in Will's mind, and he asks if that means he can use healing magic offensively. Professor Veronica smiles and nods in agreement. Standing there, Will wonders why he never considered this possibility before she mentioned it. Veronica explains that this is the nature of the mind and the difference in innate mana. That is why offensive mages rarely take interest in healing magic, and healers rarely pursue offensive magic. However, she adds that she believes Will is different. The fact that he deliberately enrolled in an offensive magic academy sets him apart. In fact, she can sense that Will's mana is not that of a pure healer. Will looks at his hand, wondering about Professor Veronica's words. He realizes that he had never noticed it himself, but he believes the reason may be his regression. Professor Veronica then points her sword toward Will and instructs him that he must recognize the aggressive passion within himself. If he is able to do that, she says, then his healing magic will surely shatter his enemies. The next day, Will stands in the training ground alongside the other students, still thinking about what Professor Veronica told him the day before. Her examples were unusual, but they felt like scales falling from his eyes. This makes Will wonder why Professor Veronica never showed any aversion toward healers. He finds it strange that she has a theory connecting healing magic with offensive magic. While Will remains lost in thought, the professor calls out to him, addressing him as healer instead of using his name. The professor announces that today's class will consist of one-on-one mock battles, and since there is an odd number of students, Will be participating as well. He adds that Will's inability to use offensive magic is his own problem, and no matter how one-sided the match becomes, Will brought it upon himself. The professor then smirks and reveals that he has already decided Will's opponent, announcing that he will be facing Ulpus. Hearing this, Will realizes it is an obvious setup and glares at Ulpus Omen, a student from a famous noble family who is always surrounded by followers. From what Will has observed in class, Ulpus is genuinely skilled in offensive magic and is not merely relying on his family name. Ulpus begins taunting Will. He mocks Will by saying that after he beats him badly, Will can run to his mother for comfort. Ulpus laughs loudly, claiming that Will's personality makes him easy to provoke. In his past life, Will might not have cared much, but now, he admits that it truly angers him. Will also wants to test Professor Veronica's theory from the previous day, so he decides that perhaps he should fight back, at least a little. With that in mind, Will raises his hand to say something, but the professor immediately states that he will not accept a forfeit. Will laughs and responds that there is no chance he will forfeit, but that he has a proposal instead. Will explains that he understands he has no talent for offensive magic and admits that the professor is right in saying that continuing like this is a waste of time. Therefore, if Will loses this match, he will withdraw from Schwartz Academia. The professor smiles, calling it a wise decision. Will then continues, saying that in exchange, if he wins, he wants permission to attend regular classes. This proposal enrages the professor, who tells Will not to be so presumptuous. Ulpus laughs loudly and agrees to the terms, mocking Will for clinging to an impossible fantasy while facing a superior opponent. Ulpus believes that the frail boy needs such delusions and adds that it would not be fun for him if there were nothing to crush. Adjusting his glasses, the professor declares that further discussion is pointless and that hypothetical arguments are a waste of time. He agrees to Will's conditions and orders both students to take their positions. As the professor signals the start of the match, Ulpus immediately begins casting magic, forming countless blades in the air. He tells Will to behold his knife creation magic and mockingly declares his intent to defeat Will, whom he calls a dropout incapable of using even basic offensive magic. Ulpus launches his attack, and in response, Will focuses on his healing magic and skillfully dodges every strike, shocking Ulpus. Will continues activating his healing magic, whose true essence lies in life manipulation. He manipulates a target's life functions to enhance natural recovery, but healing is not the only application of this ability. By converting it into an offensive form, Will can achieve physical enhancement. With this technique, Will effortlessly evades the incoming knives and even grabs one of them to deflect the others. Spinning the blade in his hand, Will takes a stance and calmly declares that he is going to borrow a knife. The students in the classroom are confused when they see Will fighting using what appears to be offensive magic, even though he is a healer. They believe that Will should only be capable of using healing magic. Hearing their murmurs, Will realizes that what he is using is not offensive magic at all, but healing magic applied in a different way. He also notices that no one is able to tell the difference. Ulpus clicks his tongue when he sees Will acting so confidently and increases the number of knives, claiming that he had been holding back until now. He then launches the knives toward Will, insisting that there is no way an offensive mage could lose to a healer. Once again, Will dodges and counters the attacks with ease, standing firmly in place. This only makes Ulpus more aggressive and frustrated, prompting him to activate another application of his unique magic, allowing him not only to increase the number of blades, but also their size. Ulpus creates a single massive knife, twice his own size. Seeing this, Will acknowledges that Ulpus is truly strong and has a deep understanding of his unique magic. After forming the massive blade, Ulpus adds rotation to it and charges toward Will. To everyone's shock, Will blocks the attack using only the small knife he is holding. Ulpus is left stunned and enraged. Consumed by fury, Ulpus attempts to charge again. Will considers whether he should strengthen his physical enhancement further, but even without increasing it, he successfully counters the massive blade. In the next moment, Will finds an opening and appears behind Ulpus, calmly stating that he will heal him properly and asking for forgiveness in advance for attacking. Ulpus is startled when he senses Will behind him. Just as Will is about to strike, the professor declares the match over and raises a large rock barrier between them. Even the professor appears surprised, stammering that there is another match scheduled and ordering both students to stand down. Will silently glares at Ulpus, while Ulpus lies on the ground, staring at Will in fear. Will then turns to the professor and asks if he is now permitted to attend regular classes. The professor clicks his tongue but has no choice but to agree. Will is overjoyed and thanks the professor before taking his leave. As he walks away, Will reflects on the sensation he felt during the fight. This is his own style of offensive combat, and it worked even better than he had imagined. He defeated a skilled offensive mage of his own age, all thanks to Professor Veronica. Smiling, Will realizes that he can truly become an offensive mage. Meanwhile, the professor helps Ulpus to his feet. Ulpus tells him that it was merely a class accident and that there is no need to make a report. Still, as he stands up, Ulpus adds that he has no desire to report every minor issue to his father either. He then threatens the professor, asking if he understands what he is implying. Adjusting his glasses, the professor replies that he understands perfectly and smirks, remarking that they cannot allow a healer to act so arrogantly. Now able to attend classes, Will takes his seat and resolves to learn everything he can about offensive magic. When the professor enters the classroom and notices Will sitting there, he pretends not to see him. Taking a deep breath, the professor begins the magic tool creation class. For a while after enrollment, the curriculum covers basic content, with the homeroom teacher handling multiple subjects. Hearing about the magic tool creation class, Will recalls that the Healing Magic Academy also had a similar course, which makes him feel nostalgic. The professor explains that today's task is to create ice bombs and that the necessary materials will be distributed. The students are instructed to assemble them by following the steps and infusing mana. In Will's past life, he only created recovery items such as potions. As expected from an offensive magic academy, they are now crafting weapons. The students assume active mana is required, but in reality, the nature of mana barely matters in magic tool creation, as most functions depend on the materials. Because of this, Will believes he should be able to handle the task. Will opens his supply bag and finds an ice golem eye fragment and flame tree branch powder. Holding the fragment in one hand, he reads the manual, which instructs him to mix the flame tree branch powder with the ice golem fragment. Suddenly, he notices the fragment glowing. Acting quickly and keeping everyone's safety in mind, Will use his physical enhancement to throw the fragment away. A loud blast follows, and the professor turns around as Will sees the fragment erupt into a large mass of ice. Ignoring the explosion, the professor demands to know what Will is doing. Will explains that the fragment activated on its own before he infused any mana. The professor responds that he does not want to hear excuses and decides to deduct points from Will's grade. Will then hears Opus and his followers laughing and turns around, realizing that this incident was caused by Opus. In the next class, which covers magical creatures, Will finds himself seated directly in front of a salamander, while the other students sit in the back rows. The reason for this is that the professor has forced students with poor grades to sit in the front and pay closer attention. Will notices how close he is to the salamander as it begins to shake before suddenly breathing flames. Will blocks the flames using a pot. The professor notices the pot and asks why Will is carrying it. Will replies that he thought it might be necessary. The professor sighs and confiscates the pot. This makes Will realize the reality of the situation. While he is technically allowed to attend classes, there is no intention of letting him participate properly. Staring up at the classroom ceiling, Will wonders what he should do next. Meanwhile, a red-haired girl in the classroom glares at Will. After that, Opus keeps bullying Will during class, always claiming that his hand slipped. The professor also deliberately calls on Will to answer questions he has not learned yet. Using this as an excuse, the professor deducts points from Will's grade, saying that falling behind is entirely his own fault. Even outside of class, when Will steps out of his room, he finds trash scattered in front of his door. The dorm supervisor later comes to confront Will after hearing rumors that Will misbehaved in class. As punishment, the supervisor decides that Will not receive dinner. Will tries to argue that it is unfair, but to no avail. Back in his room, Will lies on his bed and lets out a deep sigh, saying that everyone at the academy seems hostile toward him and that he still has a mountain of challenges ahead. Despite this, Will continues to make steady progress. After all, he fought with his own hands for the first time and won. Clenching his fist, Will believes that he can truly become an offensive mage. He then sits up, talking about the textbook he finally managed to obtain, deciding to review it for that day's lesson. The next day, Will finds himself alone in the classroom with the girl he saw earlier. Even though plenty of time has passed, the teacher has not arrived. Despite the class already being scheduled to start, only Will and the girl are present. Will looks at her and suspects that the classroom change was deliberately hidden from them. Realizing there is no point in waiting any longer, Will stands up. He approaches the girl and asks if the classroom might have been changed for the next class. She stammers at first but agrees, adding that since only Will, who is shunned by the teacher and the other students, is present, she had a feeling something like this had happened. With tears threatening to fall, she says that she guesses she has ended up on that side as well. Wearing a gloomy expression, she tells Will that they should get along since they are fellow loner outcasts. Will notices how negative she sounds, yet her words carry a sharp edge. Even so, he smiles warmly and tells her that he is happy to make a friend. He reaches out his hand to greet her. Finding his attitude refreshing, she accepts the handshake, and they greet each other properly. She then introduces herself as Erica Glenn. Hearing this, Will tells her that she is his first friend at the academy. Erica responds that it makes sense, considering Will has barely been attending classes and, on top of that, is a healer. She continues by saying that everyone believes healers are weak. Will is startled by her words, and Erica adds that even though she attends classes and is an offensive mage, she also has no friends. Will smiles awkwardly, realizing that aside from discrimination against healers, her personality also plays a role. It is common for offensive mages, who fight on the front lines and accumulate achievements, to look down on healers. In Will's past life, he was quickly recognized as the kingdom's healer, so he never experienced this kind of treatment. However, in an academy that specializes in offensive magic, that mindset is deeply ingrained. Studying here means he will have to fight against that discrimination as well. Erica then nervously asks Will why he chose to enroll at Schwartz Academy. Without hesitation, Will replies that after being a healer, he realized that it is not an excuse to give up. Erica does not fully understand what he means, so Will simply smiles and says that he has his own reasons. He then asks Erica why she decided to join an offensive magic academy. Hearing the question, Erica becomes nervous and reveals that she comes from a noble family in the provinces. However, no male heir was born, and her parents feared that the family line would end. Because of this, they believed that if she distinguished herself as an offensive mage, she could succeed as the female head of the family. Hearing her reason, Will understands that graduating from Schwartz Academy could make it possible. Erica agrees, but admits that she has almost no talent for offensive magic. Because of that, she has no friends, her classes are difficult, and overall, everything feels overwhelming for her. Despite this, she cheerfully tells Will that she did manage to make a friend. Smiling brightly, she says that if someone like Will, who is even more of a dropout than she is, can be here, then she will not feel so anxious even if her grades are a little poor. It is quite a thing to say with such a cheerful expression. Erica then tells Will to feel free to ask her anything if he does not understand something. Will thanks her, saying that he can tell she truly means well. Will begins walking, saying that things might not go the way she expects. Erica becomes very confused by his words and asks what he means by that. Ignoring the question for the moment, Will tells her that they should go and find the classroom where the lesson is actually being taught. Erica follows Will, and after walking for a while, they finally locate the correct classroom and open the door. Upon seeing Will and Erica, the professor tells them that they are late and that the class started a long time ago. Erica apologizes immediately, and Will also apologizes, explaining that he did not know the classroom had been changed. Meanwhile, Opus and the other students smile at them. Hearing their explanation, the professor says that no excuses will be accepted and then calls on Will to answer the problem written on the board. Erica is shocked by this and thinks it is unfair, since they just arrived and there is no way Will could know the answer, especially because he has barely attended any classes so far. Will looks at the question on the board and then walks up to write his answer. The professor adds that if Will answers correctly, his tardiness will be overlooked, but if he writes the wrong answer, points will be deducted from his grade. Opus smirks, saying that at this rate, Will fail in no time. Will picks up the chalk and begins writing his answer. Erica is surprised when she sees what he writes. Opus, though shocked, convinces himself that Will is simply guessing and that it will amount to nothing. Will finishes writing the answer completely, and then smiles as he asks the professor to check it. Even the professor is taken aback upon seeing the solution, and despite his reluctance, he confirms that the answer is correct and tells Will to return to his seat. Opus is stunned by this outcome. Erica sits down beside Will as well, still wondering how he managed to solve the problem. After the class ends, Erica asks Will how he managed to solve the problem earlier. He replies that, while it looked complicated, it was simply an application of an example from the textbook, which he had studied ahead of time. Erica is shocked and exclaims, asking if he read the textbook all by himself. Will confirms that he did, revealing that he had only read it for the first time yesterday. He adds that Schwartz's textbook is truly worthy of the world's best offensive magic academy. It covers a broad range of knowledge efficiently, systematizing everything from basics to advanced applications. Anyone who masters it should easily surpass the level of a typical offensive mage. Of course, without magical aptitude, even reading it would be extremely difficult. Will reflects that his strong study habits and mindset from his past life helped him understand offensive magic quickly. He found learning it so enjoyable that he stayed up late, reading ahead. Sitting next to him, Erica begins shaking, visibly shocked at the difficulty of the content. She remarks that students are supposed to go through this material with the teacher. She looks scared and worried because she had thought Will was a dropout. Tears well up in her eyes as she asks if that means she is now at the bottom and will be bullied. She pleads with Will not to leave her behind. Will places a reassuring hand on her shoulder, telling her it's fine and that he will teach her anything she doesn't understand. After all, they are friends. Erica is overjoyed and thanks him. Will reflects that while he did not come to this school to make friends, having Erica by his side will help him accomplish more. Once the classroom clears out, Will asks Erica for a favor in return, noting that classes are more than just lectures. Erica informs him that the next class is the basic offensive magic class. Will agrees, acknowledging that it is the class he has consistently struggled with and the reason he has been excluded from other lessons. Erica, confused, encourages him, saying that he should still be able to do it since he even defeated Opus. Will, however, denies it, explaining that he still cannot use basic offensive magic. She becomes worried, but Will clenches his fist, smiling, and says he has an idea that will require her help. Now, they stand together on the training ground. In offensive magic, there are basic offensive techniques and unique magic. Basic offensive magic can be learned by anyone who studies the formulas, while unique offensive magic is created by a specific user and can only be used by them. Schwartz's curriculum includes classes for both types. Since unique magic has no set formulas, even Will can participate using his healing magic offensively. However, for basic offensive magic, Will cannot pass without mastering it directly. While Will is deep in thought, the professor approaches and stands before him, commenting that lectures may go well, but practicals will be different. He warns that Will fail this class if he cannot use basic offensive magic. Will nods and walks over to the dummy, where the professor explains the assignment. He must use the basic offensive magic fireball to create a fire sphere and hit the target. The professor emphasizes that this is the most basic of basics, and if Will cannot do it, he cannot advance or graduate. The professor recalls that Will used healing magic in the mock battle the other day. He has heard stories about how healing magic improves physical performance, but Will still cannot use basic offensive magic. The professor assumes that someone is incompetent, as Will should hurry up and leave the class. However, he is surprised when Will simply laughs, and even more shocked when he sees that Will has actually created a fireball. The professor shouts, demanding to know how Will can perform this magic. While all the students and teachers look on in shock, Will smiles to himself, thinking that none of them noticed what he truly did. Back in the class, Will had Erica create a fireball using basic offensive magic and infused it into the salamander's tail. Then Will held the tail in his fist, continuously healing it so it wouldn't burn up, all while keeping it hidden. Erica, confused, asked if it wouldn't hurt Will. He replied that he was a healer, so as long as he kept healing it, this was nothing. Erica wondered if it was truly possible even for a healer, and thought to herself just who Will really was. In fact, he was the former world's greatest healer. Now, on the training ground, right before releasing it, Will activated the tail's flame stack with more healing magic to make it appear as if the fireball was generated on the spot. Then he shot the fireball, hitting the dummy. Will turned to the professor, who appeared visibly shaken. The professor was certain that the fireball was indeed from basic offensive magic and began to wonder if Will had really become capable of using offensive magic. Despite his reluctance, the professor told Will to stand down, as he had passed the test. Will thanked him and began walking away. Meanwhile, the other students whispered among themselves. Erica remained in shock, and Ulpus looked like he was about to go berserk. Later, when class ended, Ulpus confronted the professor, demanding to know what had just happened. The professor replied that he wanted to know that as well, why Will had suddenly become able to use offensive magic. Ulpus shouted that he didn't care about the reason. To him, having Will, a healer who had defied him, in the same class was completely unbearable. Then he threatened the professor, saying that if he reported the incident to his father, he could even have the class disbanded. The professor looked alarmed, and Ulpus began walking away, instructing him to use any method necessary to get Will out of his sight. The professor clicked his tongue, thinking that taking action outside of class would be extremely risky if discovered. This was not like dealing with a privileged student's normal bullying. He reflected on how hard he had worked to become a teacher at Schwartz Academy, yet he might have to take risks to protect his position. A healer acting so high and mighty. He had no idea what the other teachers might say, but he could not let some 15-year-old healer ruin his career. The professor concluded that he had no choice but to take matters into his own hands. After school, the professor called Will out to the training ground. Upon arriving, Will asked why he had been summoned. The professor replied that he thought Will might be feeling overconfident lately. Hearing that made Will happy, and he thanked the professor, but the professor quickly called him a fool, revealing that he was not praising him, and reminded him that he had already missed several classes since enrollment. The professor then asked how Will planned to make up for those absences. Will wanted to argue whose fault it was, but instead, he calmly replied that he had learned the material from a classmate and covered it through self-study, so there shouldn't be any problems. The professor countered, saying that it was not up to Will to decide. He continued, explaining that whenever a student is absent, makeup lessons are required, and the instructor in charge determines the content. After saying this, the professor ordered Will to have a mock battle with him. Will was shocked to discover that the professor wanted to spar directly with the student. The professor explained that he would give Will a handicap, considering the difference in their abilities. If Will could land even a single hit on him, he would pass. He added that with such generous terms, Will had no excuse to run away. As Will considered the terms, the professor smirked, thinking that Will's attacks would never reach him before his magic struck. He planned to push Will until he fully understood the difference in their power, ensuring that Will would listen to everything he said. After a moment of thought, Will nodded, agreeing to the mock battle. The professor smirked and decided to start immediately. He leaned in and struck the ground with magic. Will had seen this magic before. It raised the ground, but this time, it moved far faster than the last encounter. Will dodged quickly, yet the attacks kept coming, one after another. The professor taunted him, saying that all Will would do was dodge all day. While evading the attacks, Will thought that unlike creation-type magic, this technique used existing terrain, which made the attack fast and highly versatile. The professor was clearly on a completely different level than Ulpus. Still, the attacks were not impossibly fast, so Will could dodge them with ease. After evading the barrage, Will seized an opening and rushed forward, determined to land a hit on the professor while continuing to dodge all incoming attacks. The professor created another boulder, attempting to trap Will between them, and smiled, thinking he had successfully pinned him. However, the situation turned out differently. Will was on top of the boulder and leapt off while holding a knife, aiming to strike the professor. Before the attack could land, the professor transformed his body into a stone-like form. The professor then counterattacked, forcing Will to fall back. Smirking, he said that Will was so weak that, at his current level of strength, he could not break through the professor's iron wall armor. Hearing the grandiose name, Will couldn't help but think it sounded impressive. The professor continued, claiming that he had never seen anyone use healing magic offensively, and that all Will was doing was merely imitating offensive magic. Startled, Will took a breath, listening as the professor added that Will's attempt to become an offensive mage using such feeble magic was laughable. Will calmly replied that, through healing magic, he had studied the human body in depth and learned that humans naturally conserve their strength because their bodies cannot withstand their full power. Hearing this, the professor asked if Will was trying to lecture him, asserting that he would not indulge in Will's escapism simply because he couldn't master offensive magic. Will urged him to hold on and continued, explaining that even if someone removed their limiter to output more power, their body would be damaged, but since Will was a healer, it didn't matter if his arm broke. He admitted he did not like the pain, but it healed immediately. The professor hesitated, skeptical, claiming that even that would not be enough to break his iron wall armor. Undeterred, Will charged forward and threw a punch, testing his theory. To the professor's surprise, the armor shattered, and he was forced to brace himself on the ground. Will turned, stating that it was not wise to set limits for a student. When Professor Veronica had given Will the idea to use healing magic offensively, he realized that nothing was more foolish than deciding something couldn't be done. Will could grow far stronger. Sensing movement, he turned just in time to see the professor launching another attack. Will stepped back, while the professor stood, adjusted his glasses, and glared at him, clearly furious. Will asked the professor, reminding him that he said Will would pass if he landed even a single hit. The professor, visibly furious, tells Will to be quiet and says that there are no witnesses here. He continues casting magic, declaring that he cannot accept the fact that a healer managed to land a hit on him. Will lets out a deep sigh and explains that releasing the limiter is not just for punching. This time, Will enhances his footing and instantly closes the distance at incredible speed, charging toward the professor to throw another punch. Seeing how fast the attack is, the professor realizes that his iron wall armor, woven from the earth, will not activate in time. He closes his eyes, but the attack still hasn't hit him yet. Confused, the professor opens his eyes and finds that Will's punch is moving extremely slowly. Yet he himself cannot move at all. Soon, the professor realizes that time itself is slowing down. In his mind, he begs for it to stop, because the pain is lasting far longer than it normally would. It is many times worse than being hit under normal conditions. He cannot endure it, but he also cannot escape or even cry out. Desperately, he begs for it to end. When the punch finally lands, the professor is sent flying and crashes into a nearby wall. As Will heals his hand, he calmly tells the professor, "Welcome back," and explains that for him, it was only an instant. Lying on the ground, the professor shouts, asking Will what he did to him. Will replies that unlike the professor, he will explain properly. He explains that the moment he landed the first hit, he cast sensory enhancement magic on the professor. Originally, this magic is used to heal people whose eyesight or hearing has deteriorated, but Will has recently been using it to increase his own reaction speed. This time, he cast it on the professor at an excessive level. As a result, the professor's senses became abnormally sharp, making 1 second feel like 1,000 seconds. Will then taunts him, asking how painful it feels to be punched in that state, though the professor already knows the answer firsthand. Will places his hand on the professor's shoulder and continues, saying that he also has a question. He asks the professor if he has now passed the makeup lesson. The professor clicks his tongue but admits that Will has passed. However, Will has one more thing to say. He acknowledges that eliminating deeply ingrained discriminatory attitudes may be difficult, but if the professor intends to stand in his way, then Will make sure the professor understands exactly what kind of pain awaits him, etched deeply into his body. Will claims that he only wants to attend classes and, of course, doesn't want to be bothered by other students either. With an innocent, happy expression, he asks the professor if he will grant his request. Later, the professor walks down the hallway, reflecting on Will. He recalls that, generally, all healers lack fighting strength and are considered weaklings, without the will to stand up. People who are expected to obey offensive mages. Everyone says so, yet Will is different. Not only does he possess remarkable combat ability, but his strong will even resembles killing intent. At that moment, Ulpus notices the professor walking by and stops him, smiling as he asks about Will's makeup lessons. Ulpus chuckles, saying that Will is now 1 step closer to expulsion. While Ulpus talks, the professor angrily interrupts him, ordering him to shut up and warning him not to interfere with Will anymore. It is for Ulpus' own good. It would be a mistake to underestimate Will simply because he is a healer. Ulpus hesitates, claiming that this is not what he wants to hear from the professor. Then he reminds the professor that if he reports to his father, there could be serious consequences. The professor calmly replies that Ulpus should go ahead and try. Ulpus is taken aback, and the professor continues, pointing out that if Ulpus truly had the power to influence the situation, he should get Will expelled himself rather than asking the professor for help. Otherwise, it seems far more likely that Will sink his fangs into the Omen family. After saying this, the professor leaves, while Ulpus punches the wall in frustration. A few days later, after class ends, Will closes his book, reflecting on how peaceful his life has become. He glances at Ulpus, noting that the professor apparently spoke to him as well. Ulpus now glares resentfully at Will from time to time, but no longer acts out. Thanks to this, Will can focus on his studies, though he is not satisfied with simply maintaining the status quo. Erika approaches with her notebook, asking for Will's help. As he solves the problems with her, Will thinks about the future he must change, the future where humanity faces extinction. He realizes he needs to become much stronger. Using healing magic for physical enhancement was a good start, but so far, his attacks have been nothing more than punching and kicking with all his might. Sensory enhancement, while useful for intimidation, lacks the versatility of offensive magic. He still has a long way to go. Determined, Will decides he needs to think of new ways to fight. He goes to Professor Veronica to share his ideas, eager to hear her opinion and guidance. Before giving her opinion, Veronica first wants to compliment Will's behavior, because he has become a topic of discussion among the teachers, which she believes is an achievement in itself. She says that for Will, a healer, to keep up with Schwartz's classes is something very impressive. She also informs him that most of the teachers do not look pleased about Will doing so well. This makes Will wonder if she is hiding the fact that she gave him advice. However, she is not actually hiding it, as she does not talk much with the other teachers, so there was no real opportunity for her to tell them. This makes Will realize that she is being isolated even among the teachers. Still, Will feels happy, since it is all thanks to her advice, and he does not want her position to get worse because of him. However, Veronica herself does not seem to care about that at all. Furthermore, Veronica reveals that she is actually the one who is grateful. This surprises Will, so she explains that a healer would never normally think to put that theory into practice. But since Will has done it, she is very curious about how a healer can fight. That is why she wants to know his current level, especially if he continues to want advice on how to get stronger. Will hesitates to face her directly, but she tells him that there are no timeouts on the battlefield and suddenly charges toward him. Will blocks the attack and continues blocking with all his strength. Even with magic used to increase his reaction speed, it is barely enough to keep up. Will recognizes that she is not only extremely fast, but that her movements are also refined enough to deliver continuous strikes without pause. On the other hand, Will is quickly getting exhausted. There is a limit to how much he can force himself to keep up just by enhancing his physical abilities. While defending, Will thinks of a strategy and looks for a moment when she might be off guard, then suddenly strikes with a speed he has not shown before. He takes that chance and attacks straight toward her. Despite the attack, which seems almost impossible to block, Veronica's light glows and she strikes directly into Will's attack, causing his dagger to split in half. She then withdraws her sword and calmly says that she is very surprised that he made her use her magic sword, even though her expression remains completely composed. She admits that she thought that even if Will tried to learn offensive magic, he would still be just an average healer, but instead, he has top-tier ability among offensive mages. Will thanks her, but he also says that being this strong is still not enough for him. Since Veronica really likes people with ambition, she asks if physical enhancement alone is not satisfying for him. Will agrees and talks about body limiters, explaining that even after removing them, what he can do is still limited. Veronica advises that a sword is not only for slashing, but can also be used for thrusting or even throwing, so there should still be other ways to use healing magic besides simple physical enhancement. However, despite thinking of many possibilities, Will is unable to come up with a clear answer. Veronica then tells Will that he might be lacking real combat experience, because ideas need actual experience to take shape. Knowledge is important, but ideas born from experience are what Will is truly seeking, just like what happened in the battle just now. Will then asks her if he should continue training with her, but Veronica informs him about the upcoming monster subjugation field training that will start soon. Hearing those words makes Will remember how, when the three academies, the Offensive Magic Academy Schwartz, the Healing Magic Academy Heilich Academia, and the Silbern Swordsmanship Academy, joined together for monster subjugation training, students from each academy formed parties and took on real subjugation requests. When Will was at Heilich in his previous life, he did not participate, but in this life, he plans to defeat monsters and change the future of extinction. This will also be his first monster subjugation in his new life. Veronica continues explaining that to participate, Will must have his abilities recognized through the Academy's selection exam. She also mentions that there is a student known as a prodigy among this year's first years, so she suggests that Will should aim for first place among his classmates in that exam. Will soon finds out that in this field training selection exam, candidates will fight each other, and about 100 people apply each year, while only a few who truly show their strength get selected. This makes Will think about Heilich, where there were so few applicants that almost anyone could participate if they wanted to. Because of that, this highly competitive and proactive nature must be part of Schwartz's style. Thinking about Heilich also makes him think about his mentor from there. Veronica then continues, revealing that the prodigy student is rumored to have already surpassed some teachers, so for Will to take first place will not be easy at all. Of course, that prodigy student is already stronger than Will's homeroom teacher. Will also finds out that Veronica has not met that student, because she believes another professor is already looking after him, so the student does not come to her with questions. However, Will does not think that is the only reason, since other students also do not come to her either. Veronica then confirms that she will help Will with his training, which makes him extremely happy and even more motivated. Before he realizes it, the day of the selection exam arrives in the blink of an eye. After preparing as much as possible, Will is walking through the hallway when Headmaster Alnaram notices him and calls out to him. Headmaster Alnaram asks about Will's well-being and also apologizes for not being able to properly look after him until now. He knows that it is very difficult for Will to settle down in the Offensive Magic Academy, but Will assures him that he is completely fine now and even reveals that he is aiming for first place in the selection exam as well. Headmaster Alnaram is pleased to hear that, but another professor arrives and comments against Will's resolve. This teacher is the training supervisor, Bode, and he believes Will is acting arrogantly, so he wants to teach him a lesson. It turns out that Will had met this person in his past life, when he was known as Bode the Purple Lightning, an offensive mage who achieved heroic feats during the Great War. Will personally does not have any good memories of him. Professor Bode grabs Will by the collar, claiming that combat is a world of talent, and that training and effort are only built on top of that. So being a healer means Will has no chance of winning. Will simply stares at him and does not say a word, so Headmaster Alnaram intervenes and tells Bode that they should wait for the selection exam results, since there is no point in arguing right now. However, Bode insists that this is his way of educating students, and then he smirks as he introduces his own student, Sirius, who will be facing Will. He is the opponent that Will must defeat in order to reach first place. Headmaster Alnaram instructs them not to stand around and to move along, since it is time for the selection exam to begin. All the students who are there to spectate take their seats in the Coliseum, while the participants stand on the ground below. Will also finds out that Erica is participating, because if she does not, her parents will cut off her allowance. Ulpus is participating too, but for now he remains more of a background character. Headmaster Alnaram gives a polite opening speech and then explains the preliminary round they are about to hold. After a set amount of time, those still standing will advance to the main event. This makes some people worry that the ground will be too crowded for nearly 100 participants to survive at once. But then Headmaster Alnaram strikes his staff against the ground, and a galaxy-like dimension spreads across the entire field. In the next moment, the participants find themselves inside a vast forest. The headmaster then informs them that he has teleported everyone to random locations, so they may either avoid strong opponents or cooperate with acquaintances if they are lucky enough to meet them. However, their starting positions all depend purely on luck. The scene then shifts to Will, who is deeply impressed by the magic that teleported so many people in an instant. With that, Headmaster Alnaram officially declares the start of the field training participant selection exam. Will immediately conceals his presence, minimizes his life activity, and hides his existence as much as possible. He then begins exploring the forest, and soon notices 3 offensive mages fighting against each other. Will stops to observe the battle, since it is a great opportunity for him to see how different offensive magic users fight. After all, it would be a waste if Will only aimed to barely pass the exam instead of learning as much as he can from this experience. The student with the golem, who is fighting against the other 2, finally wins the battle, and while he is celebrating his victory, Will appears behind him and grabs his head. Will then uses his new spell to make the student black out and collapse to the ground, manipulating the flow of mana to take down the student. Because Will has to firmly grasp the opponent's head, this technique is difficult to use without a clear power difference, but it allows him to neutralize enemies without causing unnecessary injury. It is a technique that Will came up with during his special training with Professor Veronica. Right after that, Will senses an attack coming from behind and quickly dodges it. He recognizes the magic and lets out a deep sigh because it is the background character Ulpus acting up again, but this time Ulpus has teamed up with 2 of his friends to try to take Will down. Ulpus casts his magic knife creation, then one of his friends applies a poison enchantment to the blade, while the other uses shadow replication magic before launching an attack together. Ulpus believes that no matter how fast Will is, he will not be able to break through all of these layered attacks. The strike is about to reach Will, and although he could heal the poison with healing magic, getting through this completely unharmed using only physical enhancement would be very difficult with this number of attacks coming at once. At that moment, Will uses his healing magic in a different way, and suddenly the golem that belonged to the student he defeated earlier appears and protects him. Ulpus is completely shocked when he sees the golem moving again. Normally, healing magic only works on living things, but this golem has a mechanism that moves autonomously using the caster's mana as a medium. In other words, it is a magical creature. It cannot perform actions as complex as a living being, but if it is supplied with enough mana, Will can still control it. Will commands the golem to attack Ulpus's friends, and it quickly overwhelms them and takes them down. Now only Ulpus is left. Will suddenly vanishes from sight and appears right in front of him, then places his hands on Ulpus's head by using the same spell. He defeats him as well. After that, Will continues using the golem to fight other students. Since physical enhancement mainly leads to close-range combat, the golem helps cover that weakness by attacking from a distance and drawing attention away from Will. Will is hiding behind a tree, preparing for another surprise move, when he suddenly notices a tornado-like attack rushing toward them at incredible speed. Will reacts instantly and dodges it, but the students who were fighting the golem cannot dodge or even react in time, and they get defeated along with the golem. Will quickly realizes that this powerful attack came from none other than the prodigy student, Sirius. Seeing those abilities makes Will acknowledge his strength and understand that defeating him will not be easy at all. Will decides to test something, but before he can act, Headmaster Alnaram orders all the students to stop, announcing that the preliminary round is over. Only 4 students are still standing, and they all pass the preliminaries. Headmaster Alnaram then announces that the main event will take place tomorrow in the arena, so everyone must rest and recover until then. He activates teleportation magic, and just before being teleported away, Will notices the look in Sirius's eyes, which shows that he also cannot wait for tomorrow. Later, Will is in his room, writing and thinking about what he should do until the main event. The scene then shifts to Ulpus's friends, who are arguing with him about Will. They point out that Will healed them after defeating them, but Ulpus's pride cannot accept that. According to the teachings of the Omen family, being shown mercy by a healer is something absolutely unacceptable. Ulpus is also worried about what his father will say if he finds out about this incident. His friends have had enough of the situation, so they decide to give up and leave Ulpus behind, because they do not want to get hurt again. Filled with frustration, Ulpus lets them go and declares that he does not need to defeat Will with magic to eliminate him. While Will is reading in his room, someone knocks on his door. Hearing the knock gives Will a bad feeling, but he still opens the door and finds Ulpus standing there, greeting him. Without wasting time, Will asks what Ulpus is scheming, but Ulpus replies that he only came to have a peaceful conversation. Ulpus then admits that he has always hated healers, including Will, and that is why he has done various things to try to make Will leave the academy, although Will managed to counter some of them. Ulpus then smirks and says that he should have just said it directly instead of going about it in such a roundabout way, and he orders Will to leave the academy. Ignoring that demand, Will asks why Ulpus antagonizes him so much, and Ulpus responds that he does not need a reason to look down on healers. In the Omen family, anyone born as a healer is sent to a remote branch family. Even Ulpus's older brother is treated that way, living as a weak and helpless person who keeps smiling even when mocked. To Ulpus, a pathetic healer and a proud offensive mage are completely different kinds of people. Will understands that this way of thinking comes from the deep-rooted teachings of a prestigious noble family. Ulpus once again tells Will to leave, insisting that Schwartz is not a place for healers. Will asks if Ulpus really thinks he will leave quietly. Ulpus then smirks and starts talking about Will's family, whom Will cares deeply about. Ulpus reveals that he had servants investigate Will and learned that Will grew up with only his sister in a remote village and that they share a very strong bond. Ulpus threatens that if he gives his servants instructions, Will already knows what could happen. This makes Will so angry that he grabs Ulpus by the neck and throws him to the ground, then grips his arm and applies pressure. In pain, Ulpus begs Will to stop, saying that his arm will break. But Will tells him that he has already made up his mind and then injure Ulpus's arm. Ulpus threatens to report the injury to the academy facilities and have Will expelled, but hearing that, Will heals Ulpus's arm, which completely shocks him. Ulpus asks what Will is planning, but Will injure his arm again, heals it again, and then injure it once more while Ulpus begs him to stop. Will does not stop, because targeting him is one thing, but threatening his sister is something he cannot remain silent about. Will demands that Ulpus swear from the bottom of his heart that he will never do this again, and to ensure that, Will must break his spirit. Ulpus becomes truly terrified of Will. He swears that he will never get involved with Will again, because if he does, he believes he will suffer far worse consequences. After a long and exhausting exchange, Will finally lets Ulpus leave, completely worn out, while reminding him not to forget his promise to never lay a hand on him or his family again. Then Will returns to his room feeling strangely refreshed and decides to go to sleep. The next day, the main event finally begins, and Will is standing on the battlefield. The 4 students who passed the preliminaries will now fight in one-on-one tournament matches. Will is surprised to see that Erica also made it through. Erica explains that she was very scared, so she created walls of flames and used a siege-style strategy so that no one could get close to her. Although it is an unusual approach, Will wonders whether she can really survive using only that method. Erica asks Will to go easy on her since they are friends, but Will refuses. Even though Erica has already secured enough points to keep her allowance, she still wants a higher evaluation. So the moment the match begins, Erica attacks with fire magic, which Will calmly faces, because the orthodox flame magic's power is at a level his healing magic can easily keep up with. Will is about to brush it off. Will senses that something is wrong and decides to dodge Erica's next fireball attack. The reason becomes clear when he realizes that the fire he took earlier is not going out at all. Will begins to understand Erica's unique magic. Even if the raw firepower itself is only average, her flame magic has abnormal persistence. That makes it dangerous to keep taking hits just because he can heal through them. Will remembers the last time he had Erica create a fireball and then stored it inside a salamander's tail. He now realizes that it was not only the properties of the salamander's tail, but also Erica's own magical trait that influenced it. Now Will understands why she was able to win the preliminaries by creating walls of flames. He also notices how this ability reflects Erica's persistent and sticky personality. The crowd becomes excited watching Erica fight against Will, which surprises him and makes him wonder if people actually believe she might beat him. Encouraged by how she survived the preliminaries, Erica gains confidence and even smiles, suggesting that Will should surrender. Instead, Will increases the output of his healing magic. He then tells Erica that it is now time for him to counterattack. Even so, Erica refuses to give up and attacks Will again. This time, Will deliberately takes the attack on his fist, deciding that if the flames will not burn out, he will use them himself. Erica is shocked when Will turns his own fist into a flaming strike using her fire. Will then charges toward her to attack, but before he can land the blow, Erica gives up. She falls to the ground while trembling, and the referee announces Will as the winner. Even though Will wins, many students start booing him. Not only that, they also begin belittling Erica, which makes her extremely nervous, and she starts apologizing repeatedly. Will goes over to comfort her, praises her for putting up a good fight, and heals her injured hand. Will tells her that she had a real chance to win, but from behind, Professor Bode shouts that she never had a chance. His voice frightens her, and Bode continues by saying that since she lost to a trash-tier healer, then Bode orders her to leave, and she walks away while clearly shaken. Will argues with Bode, saying that it is far too harsh to speak to a student that way. However, Bode insists that this is his way of teaching, since he is the supervisor of the field training. Then Bode leaves, claiming that in the end, there will be only one winner. Sirius steps onto the battlefield and tells Will to move into position. After doing so, Will asks Sirius if he shares the same opinion as Bode. To Sirius, strength is everything, and since Bode is strong, Sirius believes Bode must be right. However, Sirius also acknowledges that Will is not weak, which is why he wants to prove that he himself is the one who is right. Will remembers that in his past life, he heard rumors about a terrifyingly powerful battle mage of his generation on the Northern Front. The winds that mage created kept everyone at bay and reduced everything to nothing. This time, the match is decided in Sirius's favor, and now the final match will be Will versus Sirius. Will declares that Professor Bode will never acknowledge him unless he takes the championship, so he is determined to win this match. Sirius does not respond, and the referee signals the start of the battle. In the very next moment, Sirius launches a wind attack at Will, which Will dodges easily, then uses physical enhancement to charge forward, but the force of the wind pushes Will back once again. Sirius recognizes Will's speed as a serious threat, so he attacks again with another wave of wind. Unlike the tornado from before, this wind blast spreads across a wide area and pushes everything away. Will struggles to hold his ground, but at this rate, he is about to be forced out of bounds. Realizing this, Will decides to bring out his next move and places his hand on the ground. Suddenly, a tree sprouts from the spot, and within just a few seconds, the small sapling rapidly grows into a massive tree. Erica is shocked by the sight and wonders if this is also healing magic, realizing that Will has grown stronger once again. During his training with Professor Veronica, Will had shown her this new skill to ask for her opinion. Will explained that he infused mana into a plant to make it grow at an extreme rate. While studying in the library, he learned about offensive magic that manipulates plants and thought he might be able to replicate it in his own way. With this method, Will believed he could adapt his tactics depending on the type of plant manipulation used against him. However, while explaining this, he nearly collapsed, and Veronica quickly grabbed him and asked if he was all right. Will then realized that he had run out of mana. This reaction was exactly what Veronica had expected. She explained that it is generally easier to destroy than to heal, and that healing magic consumes far more mana than offensive magic. Because of that, trying to reproduce offensive techniques using healing magic would always be inefficient in terms of mana cost. Will understood that he would need to be very careful when using this technique. And now, in this match, it is finally time to put it to use. Will knows that he does not have natural talent for offensive magic, but he is determined to prove that he can overcome that disadvantage. Seeing the giant tree, Sirius launches another attack at Will. Will manages to dodge, but the tree is sliced cleanly in half, which surprises him. Sirius can use powerful gales that sweep across wide areas, and sharp wind blades capable of cutting through even solid trees. He also controls the space around him so that anyone who gets close is immediately caught in a storm of wind, all within the range of his vision. Will judges Sirius's magic to be extremely powerful and seemingly without openings. Sirius truly deserves to be called a top candidate, but Will decides that he will still find a way to grow stronger even against this level of power. Will charges towards Sirius, and Sirius responds by raising a defensive wind that throws Will back. Instead of panicking, Will smiles. In the next moment, a branch from the tree suddenly strikes at Sirius, injuring his shoulder. Will realizes that Sirius's tornado cannot protect him from attacks coming from below. Will's plant had already spread underground, growing wherever it wanted. Technically, these are called rhizomes, not ordinary roots. Holding his injured shoulder, Sirius glances toward Professor Bode, who is sitting beside Veronica. This makes Will ask if Sirius really cares that much about Bode, even though their personalities seem completely different. For Sirius, however, strength is everything, and Bode is both strong and someone who teaches him. Will questions this mindset, and Sirius explains that in his prestigious noble family, magical strength decides everything. Age and gender do not matter at all. Whoever is the strongest at any given time becomes the head of the family. Because of that, everyone becomes an enemy in the succession struggle. Even Sirius's own father refuses to teach him magic. That is why Sirius believes that following his professor is the fastest way for him to become stronger. After revealing this, Sirius decides to unleash his full power so that Will can feel the same pressure he has endured. His tornado takes the form of a massive wind dragon. Somewhere deep in his heart, Will realizes that he has started enjoying watching and fighting against powerful battle mages. He knows that fighting without offensive talent means he has to put in even more effort, but that is exactly the point. Just because someone has talent does not automatically make them superior. Pedigree, talent, and past achievements are all equal once a battle begins. That is precisely why Will wants to defeat Sirius here and now. Sirius hears Will's words and takes them as a direct declaration of challenge. Will becomes serious and uses his special seed to grow a tree far larger than before, known as Yggdrasil. Normally, this plant would take an extremely long time to reach such a size. Forcing it to grow at this speed drains far more mana than ordinary plants. But the more mana Will pours into it, the more it continues to grow. Sirius's wind dragon crashes into the massive tree and breaks through it, but the battle is not over yet. Even as it is being taken down, the tree continues to expand and begins falling towards Sirius. This plant has especially high vitality, allowing it to grow into a giant form from just a single branch. Sirius's defense will not activate in time, since all of his power is currently focused on maintaining the wind dragon. Sirius crashes into the tree, falls to the ground, and finally admits defeat. The referee then announces Will as the winner. After hearing the result, all the students begin whispering among themselves about Will, a healer who actually managed to defeat Sirius in a one-on-one match. As Will reaches out to help Sirius up, he sincerely compliments his skills. But for Sirius, those words are not enough. This reaction confuses Will, because from his point of view, it was a fair and respectable fight. Suddenly, Bode strikes Sirius with his purple lightning and shouts that he is disappointed. Then, Bode lifts the fallen tree that was on Sirius and throws it aside before grabbing Sirius to restrain him. All the students are shocked by how harsh Professor Bode is, and when he hears them murmuring, Professor Bode shouts that the same goes for the so-called fools in the audience, because they were about to accept a healer taking first place. Will steps in, feeling that things are going too far. He reminds everyone that he is the one who won, but that does not mean Sirius was weak. However, Professor Bode interrupts while Will is still talking and comes right up to him, saying that on the battlefield, ability is everything, and if someone loses, they are treated as useless and left behind. Then Bode throws the unconscious Sirius toward the referee, which only makes Will even angrier and more determined to stand his ground. But Professor Bode is not planning to stop and continues by belittling healing magic. Will tries to convince him by explaining the importance of healing on the battlefield. He says that combat is a division of roles, and if people do not work together, then humanity will not survive. However, Professor Bode has a different way of thinking. He explains that he has seen his students stay on the front lines to buy time for rear troops, such as healers, to escape, but those same students later get overwhelmed by even weaker monsters while retreating. This reminds Bode of one of his students whose body was returned in terrible condition, with no place left to call home. Because of that, Professor Bode cannot accept healers he considers weak, since they not only cannot stand on the battlefield, but also could not save his student. Losing his patience, Bode charges forward and tries to strike Will. Professor Bode does have a point. If people are weak, then in the end, they cannot protect anything. But a time is coming when monsters will become even more dangerous. When that happens, those who are strong cannot afford to think only of themselves. Will believes that people like him, who started with nothing, need to become strong as well. That is why Will asks if Bode will acknowledge him if he manages to defeat him. Bode smirks and orders the referee to take Sirius away and clear the field, then declares that the next match will begin. The referee hesitates at this decision, but Bode uses his authority as a supervisor, leaving the referee with no choice but to announce the special match with Will. As the referee officially begins the match, Bode releases his purple lightning and declares that he will prove just how low level he believes Will truly is. Will's remaining magic is running low, and he is now facing the strongest opponent he has encountered so far. This is not a fight that Will can win through normal means, so he knows he has to rely on strategy. He begins to cast healing magic, but the process is too slow, and before he can recover fully, Bode's lightning strikes him. When the dust settles, Bode confidently explains the 3 reasons why he believes his victory is absolute. First, maintaining the right distance to suppress the opponent. Second, overwhelming speed that prevents the enemy from reacting. And third, enough power to finish the fight in a single strike. While Bode is proudly explaining his methods, the dust finally clears, and he realizes that Will is still standing. In fact, Will already knew that Bode possessed unique lightning-based magic, so in order to reduce the damage, he had to avoid letting the attack pass directly through his vital organs. No matter how strong his healing is, if his brain or heart were hit directly, healing would not activate fast enough to save him. That is why he created a blood circuit that could conduct electricity more safely, allowing the current to travel from his arm, through his leg, and into the ground, reducing the overall damage by redirecting the energy away from his body. Even with this method, Will can barely endure the impact. Will immediately starts healing his injuries so he can prepare for a counterattack. Bode lets out a heavy sigh, realizing that Will survived only through extreme effort. Will ignores Bode's reaction and activates physical enhancement magic, but it becomes clear that he cannot properly channel power through his body in his current condition. As lightning continues to crackle around him, Bode declares that the absolute rule of his purple lightning is that anyone who is struck by it becomes paralyzed and unable to move freely. Will pulls his injured hand again to try to create another path to redirect the current, but the attack still reaches him. At this point, Will fully understands just how strong Bode truly is, and he realizes that Bode's confidence and harsh attitude now makes sense. Even so, Will refuses to give up. He takes another seed from his pocket, determined to turn the situation around. Using plant manipulation magic, Will causes the seed to grow rapidly into a tree known as the Water Treasure Tree, a plant that absorbs and stores massive amounts of water from the ground. Will plans to use this tree as a shield to disperse the lightning, but it does not work as expected, and Bode splits the tree in half in a single strike. Bode then walks toward Will and asks if that was his final trick, calling the attempt disappointing. However, Bode suddenly becomes confused when he notices a mushroom growing on the tree that was just struck by lightning. Will is also surprised that his plan worked this well, and he explains that some plants and mushrooms release spores that grow rapidly after being exposed to lightning. Even a forest reduced to ash by lightning can become an opportunity for new growth with no competition. The mushroom known as foam blower is one such organism, but that is not its only special trait. Bode is still trying to understand what is happening when he suddenly feels his body starting to go numb. Seeing this opening, Will charges forward toward Bode and throws a punch, determined to seize this chance. Bode laughs when he sees this and strikes Will, sending him to the ground and leaving him in clear pain. It becomes obvious that Bode is superior in close combat as well. His unique magic allows him to manipulate electricity, and by reinforcing his body with that energy and moving at increased speed, the paralysis effect becomes almost meaningless to him. Will is completely shocked that even after doing everything he could, he still could not win. Bode then prepares to deliver another lightning-powered blow as a final attack, but Veronica suddenly intervenes and tells him to stop, saying that he has already gone too far. Bode straightens up and tells Veronica not to interfere, even pointing out that she is still a new hire. Even Will is surprised to see Professor Veronica standing up for him. She tells Bode that the match has already been decided, and that continuing any further would only cause unnecessary harm. However, Bode argues that Will can still continue because he has healing magic and can recover from injuries. That would only be true if Will still had enough magical power left, but at this moment, he has almost none. While showing his lightning, Bode claims that Will simply lacks fighting spirit. In response, Veronica releases her aura as well, making it clear that she is ready to confront him if necessary. The two of them are on the verge of clashing when Headmaster Alnaram steps in and orders both of them to stop, saying that having the two of them fight would be truly pointless. Even Bode has no choice but to obey the order. Headmaster Alnaram then apologizes to Veronica for not explaining the situation properly and formally announces the conclusion of the main event of the field training selection exam. After that, he orders everyone to leave the area. Once things settle down, Will uses what little strength he has left to heal his wounds, but in his heart, he still refuses to accept defeat, even though the gap between him and Bode is clearly huge. Will is about to faint from exhaustion, but Veronica catches him and praises his efforts, telling him not to push himself any further. Will understands what she is saying, but for him, that reassurance alone is not enough. That night passes, and the next day, Will walks through the hallway while thinking about the abilities of first-class offensive mages. It is not just their raw power that is overwhelming, but also their level of tactical refinement, which is on a completely different level. Even so, despite having warriors like that, humanity still perished in the future he remembers. That is exactly why Will believes he must become stronger. Will then arrives at the library, where he finds Headmaster Alnaram waiting. Alnaram notices that Will's injuries have already healed and says that participating in the upcoming field training should not be a problem. Will is shocked to hear that he is allowed to participate, but Headmaster Alnaram confirms that he can, since he is officially the winner of the main event. Besides Will, Sirius and Erica have also passed. Will becomes confused, because Professor Bode had said that everyone failed, and that Will did not truly win either. Headmaster Alnaram explains that Bode says the same thing every year in order to stir up the students' sense of urgency and draw out their true potential. But in the end, he still properly selects and passes several candidates. Field training does involve real danger. After all, and that is simply Bode's strict way of being a teacher. To Will, this explanation makes sense, because in the past, Bode continued to fight on the front lines for humanity's sake and was undoubtedly one of the heroes who tried to protect the world. Will may not agree with all of Bode's words and actions, but he understands that Bode acts according to his own strong sense of pride and responsibility. Headmaster Alnaram then explains that Will form a party with students from other academies, including an offensive mage, and that they will be taking on real monster subjugation requests. This will be Will's first time facing a monster since he regressed. 5 years from now, the direct cause of humanity's destruction, the monsters, will begin their major attacks, and Will knows that what he does from this point on will shape everything that follows. Originally, the term monster referred to any creature that possessed magical power. Not all monsters were hostile toward humanity. While they sometimes attacked people, that behavior was usually driven by survival instincts and remained within the boundaries of natural competition. If their ecology was properly understood, monsters could be seen as neighbors, and in some cases, they could even be utilized. However, in about 2 years from now, the world will change when the red moon appears. All monsters exposed to the red moon's light become extremely aggressive. After that, monsters begin forming groups across different species and start attacking humans without restraint, not for survival, but simply to destroy. 2 years after that, the Demon King descends. Humanity quickly falls into a terrible situation. Countless people lose their lives, and entire nations collapse. Offensive mages become highly valued on the battlefield, but for that very reason, they are sent into danger repeatedly and begin falling one after another. The same happens to excellent knights. Healers, who usually stay behind the front lines, are left with no protection once the battle lines collapse and are then overwhelmed by monsters. By the time Will dies in his past life, almost no one who can still fight remains. If only a few more months had passed, humanity would have completely disappeared. Will cannot allow that tragedy to happen again. That is why he needs to become stronger than anyone he knew in his previous life and gain the power necessary to stand against the massive monster invasion. If possible, he also wants to uncover the true cause behind the red moon that turns monsters so violent. Seeing Will lost in thought with eyes full of determination, Headmaster Alnaram praises him and says that at this rate, Will be just fine. Hearing this makes Will realize that even the teachers are cautious about field training. Alnaram claims that this is simply part of the process, but it is clear that he especially wanted to say these words to Will. Outside the academy gates, the carriage is already prepared to depart, and Will is standing there with Erica and Veronica. Soon, Will notices Bode and Sirius approaching. Will tries to speak with Bode, but Bode brushes him off in his usual blunt manner, even calling Will trash tier. Still, Bode tells Will to work hard during the field training and awkwardly thanks him for healing Sirius. This makes Will smile, and Sirius also thanks Will, saying that thanks to the healing, he can give his all in training and become even stronger. Professor Bode's teaching is that as long as someone survives and can get revenge later, then it is not truly a loss. Will comments that it is an intense but effective way of thinking and advises Sirius to grow even stronger. Sirius smiles and then leaves. Will knows that having more powerful offensive mages is a good thing, and it will surely make future battles against monsters more favorable. After that, Will, Erica, and Veronica also prepare to depart. During the journey, Veronica begins explaining about the Dunkel Forest, which lies just ahead, and confirms the details of their training mission. This time, they will be handling a goblin subjugation request in Dunkel Forest. 3 students from Schwartz, Heilich, and Silburn will form a 4-person party, along with a teacher from one of the schools who will act as support. The party members have already been decided, and Erica is in the same party as Veronica. Although Erica feels a bit nervous, she admits that this is still better than being grouped with complete strangers. Veronica then comments that Will's party is quite unusual, and soon after, they arrive at their destination. Veronica informs them that the participants from Silburn Academy have already arrived. As Will steps out of the carriage, he remembers that he knew them in his past life, although they were not very close. Suddenly, a student from Silburn recognizes Will and immediately hugs him, saying that she has been waiting for the day she could finally meet him. Will and Erica are both shocked and confused. Will quickly asks her to stop and tells her that he has no idea who she is. Hearing this, she realizes that they never properly spoke in the past and introduces herself as Marie, the granddaughter of Schwartz Academia's headmaster, Alnaram. As soon as Will hears that, he recognizes her immediately. Will never expected that he would reunite with the girl he once treated at the headmaster's home. Because of that, he immediately asks about her health, and she confirms that she is doing perfectly fine now. She then apologizes, saying that she could not properly thank him back then, but Will tells her that it is all right, especially since her grandfather later recommended him to Schwartz Academy. Still, Marie insists that she wants to repay the favor in some way. Since she had no talent for magic, she enrolled in Silbern Academy instead and trained in swordsmanship with all her strength and dedication. Thanks to that effort, she placed at the top in her academy's selection exam. It turns out that she has real talent with the sword. Will is truly amazed by this, because going from being bedridden to ranking at the top in such a short time is incredible. Marie explains that she wants to be useful to Will, which is why she is glad they ended up in the same party. Will agrees and says that they should both do their best together. At that moment, Will finally understands what the headmaster meant when he said that he was counting on him. Soon after, Marie notices that someone from Hylich Academy has arrived, so she runs over while holding Will's hand to greet them. Seeing that Will and Marie are getting along so well, Veronica decides to help keep the party's mood bright as well. After they reach the carriage, Marie starts looking around for their remaining party members. She then calls out toward the carriage, asking if Ren and Turf are inside. Will recognizes the name Ren immediately, and when they step out of the carriage, Ren introduces himself as a teacher from Hylich Academy. Will becomes very happy when he sees him and explains that Ren was his healing magic mentor in his past life and the best healer he has ever known. Because of that, Will is extremely excited to now be in the same party as his former mentor. Turf also steps out of the carriage, and when Marie introduces herself, Turf becomes shy and embarrassed. However, when he notices that Marie is still holding Will's hand, his expression quickly changes and his attitude toward Will becomes much colder. Even so, the group decides to begin the mission. Ren tells them that they can act however they want while he simply observes from the side. Marie is surprised by this relaxed approach, but Will explains that this is just how a mentor usually is. Will then goes over to Ren and asks if he can call him mentor again. Ren asks for the reason, so Will explains that he can now use healing magic as well, but he currently does not have a proper healing magic teacher. Because of that, he hopes to learn from Ren. Ren is surprised to hear this, but then he remembers hearing something about it before. He agrees and allows Will to call him mentor again. Since Will is calling him that, Marie also decides to call him teacher. Seeing this, Erica comments that they already seem like close friends, and Veronica adds that they cannot fall behind either. For this subjugation mission, each party is assigned a specific area. They will use a nearby cabin as their base of operations. The goblin territory lies a bit deeper in the forest, so Will, Marie, and their mentor decide to head out right away. Normally, in real combat situations, healers do not go to the front lines and instead wait at the base. That is why Will did not participate directly in his past life. While moving through the forest, Marie asks why Ren is going to the front even though he is a healer. Ren replies that he is technically acting as a supervisor, but he also says that they can move freely, since he does not like being overly strict or formal. When they finally reach the goblin's hideout, Marie decides to take the lead. She draws her sword and rushes forward, swinging her blade with confidence and skill as she defeats the goblins one after another. In just a few minutes, she manages to take down all of them, which leaves Will completely surprised by how strong she has become. Marie proves to be far more skilled at slaying monsters with her sword than Will ever expected. Watching her in action, Will even begins to think that she alone might be enough to defeat the monster lurking in this area. However, their confidence is quickly tested when more goblins rush in, attempting to surround her. From the sidelines, Ren carefully observes the battle. He praises Marie's talent but notes a critical flaw. While she excels at charging forward, she leaves too many openings when surrounded. Recognizing the danger, Ren instructs Will to step in and cover for her. Excited that he finally gets the chance to fight truly formidable monsters, Will tenses up. Noticing this, Ren gently places a hand on his shoulder and advises him to relax. The simple gesture fills Will with reassurance, reminding him of the guidance he once relied on. Regaining his composure, Will casts a physical enhancement skill on himself and charges into battle, taking down monsters as he moves closer to Marie. The two stand back to back, trusting each other as they fight in perfect coordination. Watching them, Ren feels satisfied. This is what it truly means to fight alongside healing magic. Before long, the monsters are defeated, aided in part by the dagger Professor Veronica gave Will, renowned for its exceptional sharpness. Marie is amazed by Will's spring-like explosive power and refined swordsmanship. Just then, Ren appears and lightly taps both of them on the shoulders, officially concluding the first day of training. As they begin heading back, Marie suddenly notices a strange change in her body. Will explains that it's thanks to their mentor's healing. When measuring healing magic, there are many indicators, such as the severity of injuries that can be treated or the types of diseases that can be cured. However, Mentor Ren's true strength lies in the speed of recovery. He heals so naturally that people often don't even realize magic was used. Because of that, non-healers rarely understand how extraordinary his ability truly is. When Will once asked him about it, Ren humbly replied that there's no need for flashy displays. As long as someone is healed, that's what matters. The world may not notice, but the greatest healer alive is Ren Kaidos. That evening, the group shares dinner as Ren informs them that they've earned passing marks for the day. While eating soup, Turf remarks that he barely did anything since everyone returned uninjured. Ren quickly corrects him, explaining that preparing healing meals at the base is also a healer's duty, and Turf fulfilled that role properly. In fact, part of the soup's delicious taste comes from Ren's special spice. Marie praises Ren, noting that he isn't just an incredible healer, but also surprisingly knowledgeable about the front lines. When she asks why, Ren modestly explains that the front lines have the highest number of injured people, so naturally, experience builds up over time. Turf adds that Ren frequently travels between different sites, which is why he rarely teaches regular classes. Marie grows concerned, pointing out how dangerous it must be for a healer to move around so much. Ren laughs it off, claiming he's confident in his ability to run away if needed. Aswell quietly drinks his soup. He knows that Ren may say that, but when it comes to saving lives, he would never turn his back. Losing Mentor Ren would one day become a devastating blow to humanity, not only because he was an extraordinary healer, but because he was one of the few who truly understood real combat. Fate may still have plans for Will and the others, but that tragic incident has not yet come. And this time, Will silently vows that he will never let his mentor die. Ren chuckles and asks if Will wants another bowl of soup. Meanwhile, deep within the forest, the goblins gather for a secret meeting. One of them raises a red gem infused with the ominous power of the red moon. The next day, the group sets out once again for goblin subjugation. Along the way, they review insights from the previous battle, and their teamwork noticeably improves. At this pace, they confidently say they could complete the request by tomorrow. However, the moment they step into goblin territory, Ren suddenly halts and instructs everyone to retreat. Marie immediately questions the decision, asking why they should turn back when they haven't defeated a single goblin yet. Ren explains that goblins have a strong sense of territory. If outsiders approach, they normally rush out to attack, just like they did the day before. Yet they've walked deep into the area, and not a single goblin has appeared. Will also finds the situation unsettling. Even Ren admits he doesn't know the exact reason, but he advises them to trust their instincts and return to base. While they're at it, he decides to regroup with another nearby party. The closest team happens to be Professor Veronica's, so they head in that direction. The goblin's strange behavior weighs heavily on Will's mind. He can't help recalling his past life. He wants to believe it's nothing, but the moment they reach Professor Veronica's base, they find Erica collapsed and seemingly helpless. Without hesitation, Marie dashes forward to save her. But it's a trap. The ground beneath her gives way, and she falls into a concealed pit. Acting quickly, she thrusts her sword into the ground, wedging it firmly to stop her fall. Will is stunned, not only by the hidden trap, but by the realization that Erica was used as bait. Ren instantly goes on alert, warning Will of incoming enemies. Spears fly toward them, but Will deflects the attacks. Emerging from the forest is a massive horde of goblins, their eyes glowing red. Marie climbs out of the pit, only to find them completely surrounded. The goblins move with alarming coordination. Will's heart sinks. He recognizes this pattern. It's the same behavior monsters displayed after the red moon. The red moon shouldn't rise for another 2 years, yet the tragedy seems to be starting already. Suddenly, Erica groans in pain. The sound brings Will a brief sense of relief. She's alive. But there's no time to dwell on it. He begins casting magic, determined to use the power he gained for moments exactly like this. Marie realizes the overwhelming odds, but Will tells her to trust him. Combining plant-based magic with techniques taught by a classmate, he summons wood golems to reinforce their defense. He instructs Marie not to take the front line, explaining that an archer is far more effective behind close combat units, where openings are easier to exploit. Channeling all her strength, Marie unleashes a powerful attack that shatters the goblin's formation. One goblin attempts to strike her from behind, but Will swiftly eliminates any stragglers that get close. Ren praises their battle formation and moves to rescue Erica. Will eagerly tells him to go, but at that exact moment, a wave of dread washes over him. He remembers another effect of the red moon. It not only makes monsters more vicious, but also allows different species to coordinate. And just as he fears, the ground erupts. An ogre that had been hiding underground bursts forth the instant Ren reaches Erica, raising its weapon to strike. Will is still locked in combat with the goblins, and the distance between them is too great. It's happening exactly as it did in his past life. Mentor Ren cannot abandon the injured. No matter how extraordinary a healer may be, the ogre swings its massive weapon at Ren, but at the last second, Ren uses the same physical enhancement technique Will demonstrated earlier to evade the blow. Will is stunned to see his mentor replicate the move so flawlessly. The ogre roars and charges again. Ren calmly sidesteps the attack, slips behind the monster, and places a hand on the back of its neck. A faint green light glows from his palm. In the next instant, the ogre collapses to the ground. After finishing off the remaining goblins, Will rushes over and asks about the technique. Ren simply smiles and replies that a good master learns from their students as well. Both Will and Marie are amazed. Ren quickly rescues Erica and decides they should withdraw while they have the opportunity. However, Will suggests eliminating all the monsters now that Ren has shown such overwhelming strength. Ren exhales and clarifies that he merely put the ogre to sleep. As a healer, even when facing a monster, he has no intention of harming it unnecessarily. He adds that when the ogre wakes up, it will be fully recovered. The group breaks through the goblins' encirclement, repelling several attackers along the way. Eventually, the goblins stop pursuing them. After reaching a safe location, Ren gently lays Erica on the ground and heals her. She slowly opens her eyes and asks where she is. Marie reassures her that she's safe. Wasting no time, Will asks Erica why she was alone and what happened to Professor Veronica's group. Erica, still confused, explains that yesterday's subjugation mission had been going smoothly. She was performing well and keeping up with the others. But the moment she let her guard down, everything went wrong. When she woke up earlier, Professor Veronica was gone, and only the two other students remained. Veronica had left a note instructing them to stand by, but she didn't mention when she would return. Worried, they discussed what to do, and Erica ultimately volunteered to search for her. Hearing this, Will immediately realizes the truth. The others likely persuaded Erica, and true to her nature, she couldn't refuse. That's just like her, but this isn't something to laugh about. One wrong step, and she could have lost her life. This is no lesson or mock battle. Erica continues, explaining that once she entered the forest, she smelled a sweet scent. The next thing she remembers is waking up surrounded by Will and the others. Ren concludes that the goblins must have used sleeping potions. What troubles him even more is the larger picture. Goblins coordinating with other species and setting complex traps. Something unusual is happening in the forest. Thinking logically, Ren decides they should regroup with the two remaining students, whose last known location was near their base. Erica leads the way, but when they arrive, they're met with a shocking sight. The base has been destroyed. Marie recalls her research, explaining that goblins are highly territorial creatures. They rarely leave their own domain without reason. For them to attack a base so far from their territory means something significant is driving them. As the others speak, Will falls into deep thought. Active aggression toward humanity is another trait monsters display after the Red Moon, but he can't reveal that knowledge yet. Ren inspects the ruined base. There are no signs of a prolonged struggle, so he concludes that the two students likely managed to escape. Acting decisively, he instructs the group to split up. Ren will search for the missing students, while Will, Erica, and Marie will regroup with Toph and leave the forest. There's a chance even their own base may no longer be safe. They hurry back and burst through the door, only to find that their base remains untouched. Toph is calmly preparing a meal. Despite the temporary relief, Will decides they should leave immediately. But the moment they step outside, their path is blocked. Monsters surround the base, and standing among them is the same ogre from before. It seems they were followed. Erica freezes in fear, but Will steadies himself. Instead of despair, he sees opportunity. If it's just the three of them, they can still win. And this time, Will is certain of it. Facing overwhelming odds, the key to victory lies in their teamwork. Will quickly takes command. He tells Marie not to push too far forward like before, just focus on landing precise strikes. The wood golems will serve as the vanguard, while Erica uses her flames to halt the goblins' advance. Erica hesitates. After being captured so easily earlier, doubt lingers in her heart, but Will reassures her, giving her the confidence she needs. Determined to make up for her mistake, she unleashes her fire magic at full power. Walls of flame roar across the battlefield. The goblins hesitate, unable to charge recklessly through the fire. Thanks to Erica's wide-area attack, large numbers of enemies can't swarm them all at once. But then, one goblin, clearly different from the others, steps straight through the flames. Realizing the danger, Will reacts instantly. He commands a wood golem to charge toward the ogre and tells Erica to set the golem ablaze. The golem charges forward and stops the ogre from moving. Marie seizes the opportunity and strikes it down. The goblin collapses, and for a moment, Marie believes it's over. Stay alert, Will warns. It's not enough. Right before their eyes, the goblin's wounds regenerate within seconds. Marie asks if they simply have to keep attacking until it stops reviving. But Will knows it's not that simple. There's no guarantee its regeneration has a limit. If they continue blindly, they might exhaust themselves first. They need a decisive method. As Will calculates their next move, a goblin suddenly rockets toward him at incredible speed. He quickly realizes what's happening. The ogre is throwing goblins at them like projectiles. Will defeats the incoming attacker, but the ogre continues hurling more. One goblin nearly reaches Erica, but Marie intercepts it just in time and takes over defending her. In that instant, Will finalizes his plan. With Erica's area flames and the wood golems containing the mass of goblins, and Marie handling the ones being thrown, all that remains is the ogre itself. Will charges straight at it. He strikes repeatedly, but the ogre regenerates almost immediately. Still, the creature is riddled with openings. Seizing his chance, Will slips behind it and places his hand on the back of its neck, just as Ren did before. This time, however, he activates a different ability, Mana Rampage. The ogre suddenly stops. Its mana spirals out of control. In the next moment, as the mana surges beyond control, the ogre collapses to the ground. By forcing its regenerative power into overdrive, Will causes its mana to surge uncontrollably, destroying it from the inside. This time, there is no coming back. Now, only the remaining goblins stand between them and victory. Soon after, they eliminate the remaining goblins, securing a complete victory. Will praises everyone for their excellent teamwork, but quickly reminds them that this isn't over yet. There are still others they need to find. At that very moment, a massive tornado rises in the distance. Will immediately recognizes the technique. That's a skill only Sirius can use. He gathers the others and heads toward there. When they arrive, Sirius is visibly relieved to see that Will is safe. Bode is also present and immediately asks about their leaders. Shortly after, Ren appears with the two missing students. Will rushes over to Ren, who explains that they were able to regroup thanks to the sudden tornado that appeared at the perfect moment. They simply followed its path. Ren then praises Will, Erica, and Marie, relieved to see that all three of them are unharmed. However, Bode interrupts with a serious reminder. Even though the immediate danger has passed, Professor Veronica is still missing. He isn't overly concerned about her safety, but they can't just leave without addressing it. Ren decides to stay behind and watch over the remaining students. Meanwhile, Will and Sirius set out to search for Professor Veronica. As they move through the forest, Will enhances his hearing to detect any living presence nearby. Since he's still inexperienced with maintaining conversations while using the skill, he advances carefully and methodically. Before long, he locates her. Professor Veronica appears unharmed, but something immediately catches Will's eye. She is holding a red stone infused with the power of the red moon. Will is stunned. Almost instantly, Veronica slips the red stone into her pocket and calmly asks why he's there. Caught off guard, Will nervously reports that the monsters have been acting unusually aggressive. After hearing this, she decides to return to the others. But Will stops her. He asks about the red stone. She offers no explanation. Will's voice trembles as he demands to know why she left her students behind. In response, Veronica apologizes, then releases a faint aura of power, quietly warning him to stay silent about what he saw. Will clicks his tongue in frustration. Veronica reassures him that she has no intention of harming anyone. Even so, he finds himself unable to press further. He lacks the power to challenge her. More importantly, he cannot bring himself to doubt Professor Veronica, the same ally who stood with humanity in his past life. And with that, the field training comes to an end. Back at the academy, Will spends a sleepless night replaying the scene in his mind. The possibility that Professor Veronica might be connected to the Red Moon troubles him deeply. Yet things were different in the past. Something doesn't add up. The next day, while walking across campus, Will spots Professor Veronica speaking with a guard. Instinctively, he activates his presence concealment skill to avoid being detected. From a distance, he overhears their conversation. Veronica's request for leave has been approved. When the guard politely asks about her destination, she refuses to disclose it and promptly leaves the academy. As Will watches her departure, a single thought lingers in his mind. Could it be connected to that red stone? With no other choice, he decides to follow her. Professor Veronica heads straight into town, and without thinking, Will follows her. If this turns out to be a misunderstanding, then he's nothing more than a stalker. But he can't afford to worry about appearances. If there's even the slightest chance of uncovering the truth behind that tragedy and clearing Professor Veronica's name, then he has to see it through. As he trails her through the streets, a wave of nostalgia hits him. He's been here before. After graduating from the Hylich Healing Magic Academy, the surge in monster activity became a serious threat, and he was dispatched to multiple battlefronts. He's certain he once visited this very city with Veronica. Then he sees her stop at a bakery. She buys honey bread. The simple sight triggers a memory. Back then, they had bought honey bread together. Will, who grew up in a rural area, rarely had the chance to eat such treats, and he remembered how delicious it tasted. He had been surprised at the time. Veronica, who came from a merchant family in the city, enjoying something so ordinary. She once told him that she had made it a personal rule to stop at any bakery she happened to pass. As a child, she traveled with her parents for business. As an adult, she traveled across battlefields, meeting countless people, most of whom she would never see again. And even if she did meet them again, they would have changed so much it would feel like facing a stranger. She didn't want to live with regrets. That's why she forbade herself from ever saying the word later. Hearing that, Will finally understood why she spoke so bluntly, sometimes to the point of intimidating others. When he mentioned how people perceived her, she had laughed, admitting she never realized they saw her that way. She even joked that she didn't know when she might die. The comment worried him, but she clarified she wasn't being pessimistic. She wasn't looking to die. She was simply choosing to live each moment to the fullest, and told him to protect her when the time came. He said yes. And yet, in the end, he failed. He couldn't protect her. That's why this time, no matter what happens, Will has resolved to protect her. But to do that, he needs to see the truth with his own eyes. He continues following her, though the situation grows increasingly suspicious. When she approaches the entrance to the sewers, Will strengthens his presence concealment skill and slips in after her. Inside, he sees her speaking with someone. The man, with striking purple hair, greets Veronica with unsettling enthusiasm. Without hesitation, she hands over the red moonstone. The purple-haired figure behaves erratically, praising Veronica's talent. He declares that with this stone, one step closer to the manifestation of the red moon. Will's heart drops. So it really is connected to the red moon. Suddenly, his presence concealment wears off. Veronica and the purple-haired guy both sense him. In the next instant, Veronica draws her sword and moves straight toward Will. He freezes in shock. Just as Veronica lunges forward with her sword, Will braces himself. But it turns out she wasn't attacking him at all. In the next instant, she deflects a sudden strike from a water dragon that had been aiming for Will. She had moved to protect him. The purple-haired man steps forward with an exaggerated sigh. He says he specifically told her to come alone, yet she broke their promise. He even claims he had hoped to welcome her as a new member. But now he feels deeply disappointed. As Veronica fends off the water dragon's attack, she calmly clarifies that Will's presence was an accident. Hearing that, the purple-haired guy casually suggests that she take down the eyewitness, Will, and then they would gladly accept her into their ranks. Veronica immediately refuses. She states firmly that she came only to investigate. Will, still shaken, demands an explanation. Veronica admits that failing to explain her actions earlier was her mistake. She reveals that on the day of the field training, she sensed something unusual in the forest. When she investigated, she discovered a berserk monster and a mysterious red stone. After picking it up and channeling mana into it, the stone emitted a crimson glow. At that moment, the purple-haired man appeared and praised her for discovering what he called a potential opportunity. When she asked who he was, he refused to answer. Instead, he gave her two conditions if she wanted to learn more about the stone and about them. First, she had to keep the red stone infused with her mana, proving she was qualified. Second, she had to come alone to a designated location without informing anyone, proving she could be trusted. Veronica explains that she agreed only because she intended to investigate them from the inside. Will finally understands why she earlier assured him she wouldn't harm him. Still, he admits that her silence left him confused and frustrated. Veronica nods and apologizes sincerely. Relief washes over Will. Professor Veronica is not the villain he feared, the purple-haired guy. However, quickly realizes that Veronica never intended to join them. In response, he suddenly throws the red stone into the river. Will doesn't understand why, until the water begins to churn violently. The red moonstone activates. The water dragon's eyes glow crimson. One after another, they emerge from the river, their movements frenzied and unnaturally aggressive. The purple-haired guy laughs, praising the power of the red moonstone. Even among their group, he claims it's rare to witness such overwhelming feral enhancement. There are 8 water dragons in total. Will immediately proposes splitting the fight and taking half of them. But Veronica refuses. Drawing her magic sword, she activates the Gale skill and charges forward. In a breathtaking display of power, she takes down the water dragons in a single decisive strike. But something is wrong. Water dragon starts to regenerate, shocking Veronica. Will calls out to Veronica, asking if she's hurt. She assures him she's fine, but both of them stare in disbelief. No amount of healing magic should be able to restore a creature from such damage. Yet these monsters stand once more. Will feels a chilling realization creeping in. Something is very, very wrong.